After releasing 3 games at this point, Capcom had now established a development routine that seemed to be working out for them, with their A and B teams alternating arcade releases to bring in a steady flow of income throughout the year. After Sunson had completed development in July of 1984, Yoshiki Okamoto's team had dived immediately into development of what would be Capcom's 4th video game. Okamoto's new project was a science fiction-like battle game presumably projected to release not too long after Tokuro Fujiwara's pirate ship Higemaru. The team worked hard on the project over the next few months, but when they finally reached the finish line, it became quite clear that this new game had some glaring issues. After going through some internal testing and evaluation, everyone at Capcom all agreed that Okamoto's newest project just wasn't very good. Plus, its generic sci-fi setting and incomprehensible character designs wouldn't help it stand out in arcades. Even the company's own sales department pushed back, saying that they had no desire to try and sell this game to arcades. It was clear to Okamoto and his team that their project was going to receive the axe. Shortly after all this, Kenzo Tsujimoto, Capcom's founder and president, took a few members of the project's development crew to see a movie titled Zero, known as Zerosen Moyu in Japan. Zero took place on the cusp of World War II's outbreak and focused on the test pilot of Japan's new superfighter plane, the Zero. The film inspired Okamoto and his team, and they would restart development on their new project from scratch, completely scrapping their original failed sci-fi arcade game. Once again, Okamoto's love for the STG genre would push him to create yet another shooter, though this time, instead of pulling inspiration from science fiction or a Chinese folktale, he looked to Zero's World War II setting and aircraft for this new game's theme and design, eventually settling on the title 1942. This project would be a vertical shooter in the same vein as Vulgus or Xevious, with the focus on making it a game that was very easy to pick up, understand, and play. Around this time, Capcom had taken notice of the growing popularity of arcade games in the Western market and wanted to create an experience that would appeal specifically to North Americans. Rather than the player taking control of a Japanese plane, Okamoto, who had had a big fascination with American military fiction over the years, decided to flip the script and instead have the player control an American Lockheed P-38 Lightning aircraft that would need to take to the air and shoot down countless Japanese fighter planes. 1942 consisted of 32 stages, which the lone P-38 would need to fight through to defeat Japan and finish the game. Every 4 levels would focus on an actual World War II battle, like the Marshall Islands campaign, the Battle of Midway, the Battle of Saipan, and the Battle of Attu, culminating with the Battle of Okinawa for the game's final 4 stages. Each of these levels would throw an onslaught of aircraft and bullets at the player that they'd need to shoot and dodge their way through. At the end of some stages, a boss craft called the Mother Bomber Ayako, named after the game's sound composer Ayako Mori, appeared and pelted the player with bullets until it was defeated. Much like the stages in the game, the Mother Bomber Ayako and many of the enemy planes were based off of actual Japanese World War II aircraft. To help deal with the hordes of enemy fighters and bosses, the player's P-38 came equipped with and could acquire some helpful abilities. The aerial loop could be used to briefly make the player invincible against enemies and bullets, but was limited to a set number of uses, represented by small R sprites, and left the P-38 unable to attack throughout the loop's duration. Capcom's signature POW items appeared once more and could provide the player with certain benefits when picked up, depending on their color. Dark green powered up the P-38's shot, white destroyed all on-screen enemies and bullets, yellow granted an extra aerial loop use, and orange rendered all enemies unable to fire for 15 seconds. For the gray POW item, Okamoto once again pulled inspiration from a previous Namco arcade game. When the item was collected, 2 side fighters would appear and fly alongside the player's P-38, mimicking its shots, which was a nod to Galaga, where if the player's ship was captured, it could be reclaimed alongside the current ship, effectively doubling the player's firepower until it was destroyed. Now making its 4th appearance, Capcom's signature Yashichi would show up once again as an item that awarded points if the player was able to shoot down a green enemy ship that sometimes snuck onto the screen from the bottom and quickly tried to escape away from the player. Roughly 2 months after Okamoto and his team had scrapped their sci-fi project and started development on 1942, the game finally reached completion and debuted in Japanese arcades on November 30th, 1984. It performed only moderately well at first, competing against Irem's incredibly successful Spartan X, known as Kung Fu Master in the West, which had released just a few days prior. However, 1942's popularity continued to snowball throughout 1985, and the game eventually found massive success, continuing to be a hit in arcades even well into 1986, 2 whole years after its initial debut. While many may wonder how a game based on attacking and defeating Japan's own army found so much success in its native country, it's quite possible that either many of its fans chose to ignore the subject matter due to how fun and addictive its gameplay was, or if the anti-militarism that permeated the country after World War II might have made people more accepting of the game's theme. Regardless, 1942 would be Capcom's first major hit in Japan, pulling in huge profits for the company and establishing them as a major player in the gaming industry. Following its Japanese release, the game made its way to the Western market in mid-1985, once more finding immense success in the regions Capcom had been targeting during its development. While titles like Vulgus and Son had found some popularity, 1942 was a game changer. The title's huge success meant that it would receive ports, lots of ports. It would be Capcom's very first home console game published for the Famicom and NES, first releasing in Japan on December 11, 1985, almost exactly a year after its arcade debut. Though it was far from the best and most authentic experience, being developed by subcontractor Micronix, it was still a very big step for Capcom. Aside from the Famicom and NES versions, 1942 also received many PC home ports for various platforms, including the MSX, the Commodore 64, the Sharp X1, the ZX Spectrum, the PC-88, the Amstrad CPC, and the FM7. While some of Capcom's previous titles received a sequel, 1942 would be the first release to become a huge franchise for the company, spawning the highly successful 1940X series of games that included 1943 The Battle of Midway, 1941 Counterattack, and 19XX The War Against Destiny. Like Capcom's earlier games, 1942 was included in many Capcom Classics collections throughout the years. It also received a port for the Game Boy Color by Digital Eclipse and saw a release on the Wii's Virtual Console. In 2008, Capcom released 1942 Joint Strike on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, though this game was really neither a port nor a remake and functioned more as a brand new entry in the 1940X series, despite it using the 1942 name, combining many elements from previous titles in the franchise. As 1984 came to a close, Capcom's first year in the video game market had ended strongly, with 1942 being their biggest release yet. The game would pull the company from being a mid-tier developer to one that could compete with heavy hitters in the game industry like Namco and Konami. Little did Capcom know, though, that 1985 would be an even bigger year for them, introducing groundbreaking new titles which would take the gaming world by storm.